Okay. In archaeological field work, sometimes you have to see this kind of things. Of course, the really old bones may not remain in the soil, but the rather later ones, like a Edo period, it's like a 200 years old grave, round wooden coffin, and man's body inside, sitting in the sitting form. And this one is in Tokyo, in Kanda area. There's a old Edo period graveyard attached to the early temple. It's not there anymore. Everything has disappeared and hidden under the building skyscrapers. But as you go down and dig the ground, you will find hundreds of these burials and other material as well. And these are so new, it looks new. And you don't see any meat or other organ except for bones. But sometimes a brain may remain in the hard shell of the skull. So it's kind of gross, but still, it's a treasure of data for us. And from bones, so many things may be able to tell you. And this is a difference between male and female on bones, you know. Can you, do you realize the differences between sex? Male and female? Well, in general, the male bones are thicker and stronger, look strong. That's a general tendency. What else? Can you tell me? So of course, there are stout ladies and very thin guys exist actually, but even so, there are obvious differences between men and women. Pelvis right here. See the hip bone. So in general, women has bigger ones, you know, very strong and bigger ones compared to male. You know, they have to raise kids, babies inside, so they have to protect it. That's why. And another obvious difference, it's really obvious, you can see it right away, is on your skull. Can you tell the difference between male and female on the skull? Tokus.
The jaw.
Pardon me?
The jaw.
Jaw. Jaw looks really strong. エラが張ってるって言うんですね。Very big. But it depends on the person, I think. The jaw difference is not the sexual differences. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right here, right above your nose, on the eyebrow, on your eyebrow. This part on the male, this part is sticking out, but female, it's very slender, very smooth line right here. You don't see any parts projecting, but male, this one's projecting. You can touch yours on your brow right here. The male, you see a projecting part. You know, this is really obvious. So when you see a skull, you can immediately tell the difference. I mean, the sex. And the other one is a tiny bit of projection right here in the behind back of the head. It's a tiny projection. That's the male, and the female doesn't have that either. So anyway, That's the things you can tell immediately when you see the skeletal remain. And this is one example of a accident, injury. This is a thigh bone. It's one of the strongest bone in the body. And you can tell this was broken in two. And also you can realize that this one has been attached, I mean, cured. It's not just broken only, but it's been cured and stuck together, though it's kind of tilted, distorted. But, and this would tell you that this must have been a big accident, and it must have been really painful to this guy, but he didn't die for it, right? That's why it's been cured. He was living, and those organs got cured. And yeah, it's one thing you can tell from this kind of trouble. And this is another example of injury. You have a crack from eye to your cheek. It's a big crack, and there's no sign of cure. So obviously he died from this big injury, probably from fighting or something, in the Yayoi period. And also, this is unusual one. This is from South America, and your head was cut. You see a cut line, a lot of cut lines. They're probably something like a saw. It's another try mark right here. But, so it was opened by cutting the skull, and they did the surgery on your brain directly. And I'm pretty sure in a lot of cases they died from it, but some of them have indication of cure right along this cut line. So probably he or she could live for a short time after the surgery, I guess. This is a very, very exceptional example. But so from bones, there are a lot of information that you can acquire. Okay, and cultural anthropology. This is very close to ethnology. Sometimes we cannot really distinguish each other, and nowadays cultural anthropology covers the wider range of human element, than ethnology. Ethnology used to be like going to a certain group of people, mainly those who lived in ancient life, should I say, like those people in New Guinea who are still using stone tools, and those naked people in the Amazon would shoot monkeys with a bow and arrow, and those kind of well, I shouldn't use the word, but savage, so to say, earlier cultural stage people, and record their lifestyle, their culture, everything you can see and hear, or whatever that is, and that's the ethnology. And cultural anthropology doesn't really handle those early style, but even the latest modern style of human culture. Like I heard that once cultural anthropology professor of ICU was specialized in the study of convenience store. I don't really know what that is, but probably it's a development of the convenience store along with human cultural development or something like that. to meet the needs of the people, they have to change their style and layouts and everything like that. So that's one style of cultural anthropology now. Some of his students wrote a thesis on illegal bike parking around the train station or something like that. It's really interesting. Well, you can do anything related to human habit. So anyway, the cultural anthropology or ethnology, that's the study of human beings of the present, living people, not like archaeology. Archaeology is for dead people, right? Past people. So that's an obvious difference. And archaeologists are so envious. We always envy cultural anthropology or ethnology because they could handle all sorts of things that archaeology can never do, and like spiritual culture, those ideas, concepts, and images, emotions. That's almost dominating half of our lives, and you can observe it in front of you, and you can record it in cultural anthropology, but archaeology, like music, singing, dancing, ceremony, whatever you see or hear, you can record it, So we are always envious about this, but of course we need a lot of help from those fields, cultural anthropology, because it gives a lot of hints to our study from the artifacts. For example, there's obviously there are some races. Oh, wait a minute. Quit this. Using this one, polished stone axe. Even today, they use it to cut and work with wood. And they look so alike, with the earlier artifacts. So as I told you before, from the point of view of archaeology, you can't really tell how this was made and how this was hafted and how this was used. But in the cultural anthropology, you can see and record them, all of them, how they made it. You can really record how they make it in front of you. They would make it for you and use it for you. And those data from cultural anthropology would give you a hint that probably the earlier people would do the same thing. So it's really, really useful. Their data, ethnography, that's what we call ethnography, the records of ethnic culture, is very useful when we have to explain and analyze about the archaeological artifacts. But of course, it has a limit. You can't really prove it, even though you know how to make those kind of artifacts. I mean, tools in present days. You can't be assured that it was made in the same way in the earlier stage. 昔の人がね、同じ方法でやったとは限らないということですね。So you can't really prove it 100%. But it gives a lot of hints. And we like it. And there is there is a field called ethnoarchaeology, 民族考古学っていうのがね、あります。And it's really exciting field too. Also, history. Of course, we are handling history in archaeology too, but there is a field called history that normally handles literature, the written material, and so little written records, their material And they don't go for the artifact study or go out in the field at all, but just trying to decipher books. And of course, this history has a limit too, because written material may not describe the truth or fact. They may lie, you know. In the earlier time, the writing were not really popular in the earlier stage, and only those with the power, those like kings and those emperors and stuff, they used the writing for recording of his reign or his uh, dynasty or whatever he wanted to make record of. So in that sense, he could lie, of course, you know. He wouldn't let his man record about his bad reputation or whatever the things he did wrong, and he wants to erase those. So in a lot of historical record, like in China, there are a lot of description that may not be true. And it's very difficult to define. It's difficult to tell which is true and which is not. So that's kind of the limit of material, literature study in history. And of course, archaeology and history are very close together, must be close together. And we could work together, of course. And for example, there may be an earlier description about emperor's record in Japan would say something like he used to make a temple in Asuka area, Western Japan. It's an early area of development, and but those temples may not exist now, disappeared or too soon, and you can't see anything there, right there in the description. Even if you go there, you can't see. It's just a field or a rice field or grass field or whatever. And then archaeologists would go there and start digging the place and may find something like foundation stones for the pillars of the temple and aligned in a neat shape. So then we could say, oh, there used to be a temple right here. So the historical description was right. It was a fact. We can prove it. So in that case, we can cooperate, historian and archaeologists may be able to cooperate and prove things, historical things too. Okay, art history. The same history, but it's limited to art study and mainly handles spiritual culture. That took form in the form of the art. And it's really difficult to study about art because you can't really describe the concepts like beauty. How do you explain about beauty in words? It's really difficult. So it's kind of natural for them to be a little bit subjective than objective. ちょっと主観的になるんですね。For example, there is an old temple called Horyuji in Nara, in Japan. And it's one of the earliest wooden structures in the world and still remaining. And it looks really weathered. Now, if you go there, a lot of tourists, some of you might have gone there, but it looks really good. It looks really old and rugged and, very Japanese taste like stuff. And but actually, when the temple Horyuji was made, the entire temple was painted in red and green, bright red, bright green, and gold plated and everything. So it was so different. Must have been so different. And it's not like Japanese. It's more like old time Chinese. Of course, it was built under a lot of influence from China. And those pigments, the paints, disappeared already. But sometimes in a crack of the pillar or something, tiny crack, may contain some remnants of the paint or pigments, like red paint. And when we find it, art historians may say, just look at it, look at the piece of the paint, and he would say what it's made of, what the paint is made of. The red paint was made of either iron or mercury, 水銀ね, mercury, or lead ですね, 鉛, lead. Three types of pigments existed in an earlier time. And art historian would say, oh, this is mercury one, just by looking at it. Really, this is a real story. And archaeologists would go up with a container, glass container, and the pincet, tweezer, and just take the sample out of it and bring it back to the lab of the scientists and do the analysis, of course, scientific analysis. And that would give you an obvious result, which material was this pigment was made of. So that's the difference. It's subjective and objective. And but still, we can work together. Sometimes a lot of fighting occur, but we could support each other in various manners, of course. And so archaeology is a human study through material culture. That's different from history or art history, but it's really objective, scientific, and verifiable. And but of course, when you use these scientific methods and data, as I mentioned before, you have to be really careful. You have to be really careful about explanation or what should I say? When you want to get to your result, you really have to be careful. You can't just rely on data only. You really have to be objective and try to explain it fully, not just from data. So as a whole, archaeology is like detectives, detectives that search for criminals. And he would just spend day and night. And it's a physical labor, and at the same time, it's intellectual labor too. You have to guess from tiny evidences like a hair, like a strand of hair, a speckle of blood, or something like that. And it's just like archaeology. It's all the same, what we're doing. Only the difference is we're not trying to prove the crime. Sometimes maybe, but so anyway, it's a kind of painstaking work. とても大変です。All right. So that's a general explanation about the methods of archaeology. Any questions so far? 大丈夫かな? Okay, so we're kind of in a weird schedule, and I'm kind of behind the schedule, I think. So I want to go into the next one, number three, Paleolithic period. I've already. And just a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. All right, so go into the real story of Japanese history. And let me start from the explaining about definition of a Paleolithic and Neolithic. Paleo is early, old Latin, isn't it? And Neo is new, and lithic is stone. So early old stone tool and new stone tool, or old stone style or new stone style. What's the difference between those two? And Paleolithic stage is the stone, the time that they made the stone tool by chipping, hitting or pressing and chip it and form it. And into the Neolithic period, they also used the chipping technique, but they also added grinding or polishing technique. So obviously these are chipped stone tool, although it's not Paleolithic. And arrowheads are chipped stone tools. They're Neolithic, but in Neolithic stage would add this kind of polished, very smooth polished tools. Mainly adds. We don't have a lot of Paleolithic material because the number of Paleolithic tools are a lot less than Neolithic one. Of course, the population is different. And this is a replica of the hand axe. We call hand axe. It doesn't exist in Japan because it's a really, really old type of Paleolithic. Paleolithic Cusic are also divided into lower Paleolithic, older Paleolithic, and upper Paleolithic. That's later one, lower and upper, and sometimes middle. And what we see in Japan is only the upper Paleolithic, later ones. And this kind of tool belongs to the lower, earlier ones. You can find it in Africa or some parts in Europe, and maybe Middle East sometimes. And actually, this stone is not Japanese stone. This is flint. This is from Germany, but this is a flint stone. It's not like obsidian. It doesn't have a glass structure, but it gives a very sharp edge when you chip it. You can see the sharp edge, right? And you can see the chip mark, flaked mark all along the blade. ちょっとわかりにくいかな。So this is very roughly made early type of stone tool, and this is chipped Paleolithic stone tool model. And we don't have this big ones either in Japanese Paleolithic. It's like this one. This is a rare one. This is knife-shaped tool, we call. This part, this edge is very sharp and looks like a kind of knife, but it's not a knife. It's a spearhead, actually. You heft it at the end of the stick and you use it as a spear. It's very sharp. And you see a lot of small, tiny, flaked faces to shape it to this form. And even this is kind of bigger example. The normal one is even smaller. It's tiny. It's only like 5 centimeters, 2 inches, more or less. And this is also the knife shape too. The edge is chipped to give this sharp shape. And this is also a spear point. The spear point in Japan are not very big. They're very sharp, but very small too. So this is Paleolithic tools. If you can compare with the Jomon tools, the same chipping technique, but it's obviously different. And this looks better in terms of technology, but actually this requires more refined technique to make. Doesn't look like it, but it's really difficult to make one of these from a block of stone. And this one is not. If you're good enough, you can make it. I can make this one, but I may not be able to make this one. It's really, really strange. But so the Paleolithic stone tool technology is pretty high. Okay, so that's the difference between Paleolithic and Neolithic, but it's only the term as to the stone tool. But actually, it belongs to the culture. Paleolithic culture and Neolithic culture is totally different because Neolithic economy depended on nature. It's a hunting and gathering economy. 狩猟採集民ですね。And as they went into Neolithic, they went into agriculture. It's totally different. They started to control over the nature. And also in the Neolithic stage, of course, they started the agriculture, so they have to stay there. So they built houses and villages and settled. Sedentary lives, ですね. While Paleolithic earlier people were wanderers, they hunted the animal, especially those large animals like elephants and huge deers that wander around eating grass and has no plan of travel. So they had to chase around those animals. So they could not stay in one place, like making houses, building houses, or making settlements. That wasn't possible in the earlier stage. But into Neolithic, they settled down. Sedentary life has started. And use of pottery starts from Neolithic too. In the Paleolithic period, they could not own pottery or use pottery. They didn't know how to make it either. And there's no indication of pottery in that stage. And other thing is the domestication of animal. And they start raising animal from Neolithic period. Of course, they could do that because they settled down. They made villages and settlements, so they could do all sorts of things. That takes time and effort. And that's the difference, major difference between Paleolithic and Neolithic. In general, that's a term in general of the world archaeology. But it's quite different in Japan because Paleolithic time is about the same as the world, but into Neolithic, there is, we actually, what I'm trying to say is the Jomon period, Jomon culture is totally off the line because Jomon people, of course, made houses, made dwellings, and settled down in sedentary lives, used pottery, Jomon pottery, but they never went into agriculture. They remained hunter and gatherer of the Paleolithic style. They never wandered around, but they were still in the stage of hunting and gathering. And also they never domesticated animal. Probably raised some animal to some extent, only some extent, but they never really systematically domesticated the animal. And of course, they could grow some plants, they could control some plants in a very small scale. And we would not be able to call it agriculture, but it's horticulture. You may call it horticulture. Yeah, horticulture. It's like it's like growing vegetables in your garden. You know, some of you may be doing that, growing some tomatoes and things like that. Horticulture is a very small level, small scale of growing plants and stuff like that. And also, they could have, German people could have uh, uh, grown something like a chestnut tree and probably formed and controlled the chestnut forest or wood, you know, group of trees. That's about the extent that they could reach, and they never went to agriculture until Yayoi period, the next one. Right? So German period doesn't fit to the world standard of the cultural transition, and it's not Neolithic, partially Neolithic, but it's not exactly Neolithic. Especially the economy was dependent upon hunting and gathering. So it's different. It's kind of strange. And we would talk about it later, of course. And difficulty of study about Paleolithic because it's a long time. In Japan, it's over like 25,000 years, while Jomon period was like 12, 13,000 years. It's more than double. So it's a long time, but the population, the total population was so small compared to the later time. So obviously the number of sites, remaining sites, and number of tools that's included in the site are small, a lot smaller than like Jomon period. And limit of number of sites and material kind of limit of study in the Paleolithic field. And not very many types of tools. There are various types of stone tools, but they are not comparable. When you talk about Jomon pottery, you have like more than 200 types, you know, only for the pottery, but it's not that much in the earlier stage. So it's kind of difficult to study about it. And moreover, the organic material, we can't expect any organic material in this earlier period. Some Jomon period would show like a waterlogged site or marshy wetland site that contains a lot of organic material remaining. But that doesn't happen in Paleolithic environment. We haven't found any of those in Paleo. So except for natural ones, you know, natural ones like fossilized bones of those elephants, Nauman's elephant, or even mammoth in Hokkaido would remain, and some of the tree trunks remaining underwater of that time, but not the human-related artifacts or evidences you can find in the Paleolithic period or layers, or I mean organic material. You can't find. Only what you find in those loams, stones, stone tools, or in many cases we'll find out so-called we find features, so-called pebble cluster, stone cluster. It's a cluster of stone, round stone, and they're all fired. It's a red, it bears a red color, or sometimes soot and charred material over it. And obviously they were heated on fire. So we regard them as a cooking feature, but those pebble cluster remaining in the ground, of course, they are stone and durable, as well as stone tools. And fragments that were left when they made the stone tools by chipping. You find all sorts of tiny flakes and chips from the site. And in many cases, most of the cases, they are concentrated in one spot where they made the tools. And nothing else we can find as the remain of human activities, except for charcoal, 炭ですね. And we often find cluster or concentration of tiny speckles of charcoal. And obviously it's indicating the location that they made fire for whatever the reason. And all the organic material are so fragile and they're easy to decay and disappear all too soon. But when wood was burned, fuel was burned and remain as a charcoal, it stays long, over thousands and thousands of years. You can still find them. So those are the only material we can find from the Paleolithic period layers. Okay, let's start from the formation of Japanese archipelago. Yeah, that's an early story, like a 1900 million years. It was, wait. I will show you the picture. All right. It's like that. This is a Siberian area. And so Japan was like this black fat line. It's a cluster of islands. Was the Japan in this earlier stage. And this gray area looks like Japan is what you see today, but the form of Japanese islands are different. It's more straight. So, but it didn't appear like this. These islands, small islands, were the real islands at the time. And the gray map matches the area only for comparison. So 500,000 years before present, it's like this. It's more like what we see today, but the shoreline is different. This fat line, black line is, black line is the shoreline of that time. So there's no ocean between continent and Japan right here. There's a Japan Sea, but it's like a lake. It's enclosed, has no opening to Pacific Ocean. You could walk from China to Japan at the time. And that's how those various animals came in to Japan, by walking. Yeah? So enclosed right here. And 200,000. This is 20,000 years. Oops, sorry. 20,000 years before present. It's very close to what we see today. And still, it was a glacier period. The glacier period, the entire Earth was cold. And naturally, the polar area, the most cold area, accumulates more snow and ice. And the entire water of the Earth, on the surface of the Earth, were less because the area of high altitude, the high mountains, and those polar area accumulates a lot of ice. And so as a result, the ocean levels go down. surface of ocean was very low at the time. Like in this time, 500,000 years ago, as you can see, this was a land. Today it's an ocean, but it was a land. So you can see how low the ocean level was. And it's like 200 meters down from present level. And by 20,000 years, it was low, but still, it was not as low as this one. And it's like a 120 meters down. And you still see a narrow straits right here. Tsushima Kaikyo, Tsushima Straits is near this one. It was very narrowed down to fine. Oh, okay. And there's another straits, Tsugaru Kaikyo, Tsugaru Straits between Hokkaido and Honshu. And this one was also very, very narrow down because the ocean got down. So the Japan Sea right here was also like lake. And that gives a lot of difference in the environment. And the reason why Japanese archipelago starts from the cluster of islands became like this bent shape is because of the pressure from the continent. Constant pressure given from the continent gives this kind of curve. And at the same time, from the plate tectonics theory, plates, the rock bed under the ocean, and separated in various places, and they're moving around very slowly, like a Pacific plate that's coming toward Japan from southeast, directly coming to Japan, is moving like 8 to 9 centimeter per year. It's a lot. And that's why we're having a lot of earthquake and volcanic activities. So volcanics are active in Japan because of this plate tectonics. And so Japan has been pressed down from the continent and pressed up from the plate. So that has been giving hard time to the island. So sometimes island part is raised, sometimes go down. So constantly the landscape are changing very slowly. But anyway, that's how Japanese islands were formed in a lot of times. And so volcanic activities are so active, very, very active in Japan. Even today we have what, 120, almost 120 active volcanoes all over Japan. And you hear the news quite often about eruption, small scale eruptions. And like Mount Fuji has erupted uncountable times, so many times. And its volcanic ash accumulated over 20 meters thick. It's incredible, but that's how it was. And in the earlier time of Paleolithic, the volcanic activity was so lively and gave a lot of hard times to the people too, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. This chart shows there was one volcano called Aira, named Aira, in the Kagoshima prefecture, south end of the Kyushu area. And this volcano erupted about 29,000 years before present, 29,000. And that was one of the biggest eruption ever took place in Japan. And its ash flew all the way to Tohoku area, partly Hokkaido. Nowadays, you can find it in Hokkaido too, a little bit. So that tells that it was a big eruptions. Ne? 80 Tanzawa volcano ash flew all over and it covered the entire Japan almost. And I'll talk about it later in the history part because it gave a huge, immense effect upon humans' lives, obviously. So anyway, in these, you see the volcano marks right here, Hakone, Oyama, Ontake ですね. And Akagi in Gunma Prefecture, also still active right now, and gives a lot of effects by flying ash. And let's see. Glacial declination of sea level. I talked about that. So the earlier declination of the sea level, because glacier period comes every 100,000 years, 100,000 years, almost more or less. It comes every 100,000 years. And in the earlier ones, when the degree was very, very low, and it was very cold, and ocean was so low, over 200 meters down. So as I showed you, the continent, Chinese continent and Japan was connected by land bridge. So that all kinds of fauna, mammoth, Chinese group animal. These are the kind of animal that came into Japan by walking from the continent area. Mammoth and those northern cold climate kinds came in from northward, but some of those southern type came from China by walking like that. So we used to have a lot of elephants, and this is a big horned deer, Otsunoshika. It's a huge monster-like deer, and had some of the rhinoceros. Well, not rhinoceros. Rhinoceros and pandas stayed in China, I think. But something like big bison. These bison types also came into Japan. We see some fossilized remains in Japan too. So anyway, but at that time, human beings were not around, and they never came into Japan with animal. And the climate of the glacier period was very cold and dry. The water circulation is not active, very cold. May snow some, but there's not much evaporation. 蒸発しないんですね、寒いから。So it doesn't make any clouds, and not very much of snow or rainfall could take place in this period. So it was cold and dry, and a lot of volcanic activities. And ocean current were not very active either. You know, everything is so still and silent and cold and dry. And the landscape were, wait a minute, where am I now? Oh, this is the elephant. Wait, come back to this one. Okay. Sea level change. This is a chart, a very old chart. And horizontal lines, years, 30,000 20,000, 10,000, 5,000. This is present. And this is zero is a sea level of the present day. And sea level changed from time to time. Like 30,000 years ago, it was very low, and even lower, went down. And this was a peak of the glacier period, very cold, this coldest time, isn't it? So ocean was lower and over its minus 120 meters. But after 20, well, it's not 20 actually, but it's like 18, 17,000 years before, the glacier period ends and it becomes warmer and warmer. It was very rapid. It's incredibly steep curve that you can see. And sometimes it goes down again. It's really like a jet coaster, like change, and it must have been a very harsh environment for beings. But it went up so high and into, well, this is about the time of the German culture started. It goes up, and even upper toward, it's like 5 to 6 meters, I think, and higher than present level. In about 7,000 years ago in German time. And this was a peak of the heat. It's the thermal peak, what we call, between the glacial periods. And the peak was already passed, and the climate, temperature is going down. And we are at this level, but it's still going down very gradually. And we are heading for another glacial period. Although nowadays we talk about the heating of the environment, but in general, in a large scale view, the entire Earth is heading for another glacial period now. Anyway, I'll talk about it later too in the German time. And oh, this is the earlier one, when animal came in from China. Japan Sea is so small, it's not a sea, it's not an ocean, it's a lake. And of course, there are various rivers, big rivers, Amu River right here, that comes in, the pure water comes into this lake. So the water becomes more and more pure and not salty at this time. That also changes a lot of environment, fauna and flora. Okay. Yeah, we saw that. This is the Nauman's elephant replica. It's a huge one, even compared to the present elephants you see at the zoo. And hairy style. It's very close to the mammoth, but a little smaller than mammoth. This kind of large mammals were wandering around in Japanese archipelago. And also, this is a bighorn deer, Otsunoshika's. How big this is. This is my daughter when she was in 15 years old or something. So you can tell how big this guy was. It's like a monster. And a herd of it, a group of it was wandering around the area. And this is one of the typical landscape of that glacial time when human beings came into Japan. And the time is not clear. The earliest evidence of human occupation in Japan is just like 38,000 years before, and nothing earlier than that. So probably that was a time. And it was a glacial time, of course, the last glacial period. And they came in. We don't really know how they came in, because at that time, the two straits between Hokkaido and Honshu, the Tsugaru Straits, And Tsushima Straits, the Korean Peninsula one, were not closed. They were still ocean. They were very narrow compared to today, but they still had this ocean in between. So they had to go cross the ocean. And nowadays, there are popular theory is that they had boats like canoe, dugout canoe. And Science Museum, National Science Museum of Japan has been making experiments that whether they could come across the ocean from China to Japan. And they say they succeeded, but I really wonder. It's really strange stories about those. But so we don't really know. But my theory is that most of them firstly came from northward, from Hokkaido and down to Honshu, main island, going across the Tsugaru Straits, because this was a glacier period and temperature was low, and the Tsushima Straits were placed in northern part, and it was very cold, and probably depends on the climate changes, of course, year by year. So sometimes it may be even colder than normal, and in those times, maybe the straits might have been frozen, so that you can walk on the ocean. That's one possibility you have to think about, and that's the only possibility for me for the first migration into Japan. Well, we can't prove it, so we don't know it now. But well, sometime we'll find the way, of course. And this is the landscape of that time: very cold, dry, and spruce forests or wood, only growing conifers. 針葉樹ですね、conifer. And there's no broadleaves. 広葉樹はないですね。It's too cold for them. And the conifers in general would not give you much fruits or nuts to eat. Only a little tiny ones from pine kind, but not very much you can have for diet. So their major food was animal meat. So naturally they have to wander around and hunted the animal, because those larger games were also wanderers. They ate grass, and when it's over, they just moved by herd, by group. So their movement was not really planned. It depends on the movement of the animal. And they could not make houses. They had to have something like tents. So they were the campers. They put up tents and collapsible house ですね. And they made stone tools, made those spears, and hunted animal, and built fire, and very simple life, I would say. Not much to do, not much they could do, except for hunting. And usage of this animal is very important, because it's not just meat eating, but they could use the hide, skin of the animal, and make those kind of clothes, and bones and antlers, or tusk, or fangs, whatever, teeth, into various kinds of tools. But it's a great pity that those organic material doesn't remain in the loam, because loam soil, the volcanic ash soil, is acidic, and it's so easy to decay organic material. So we don't see those bone tools or anything like that, organic stuffs. While in the continent, like Siberia, there are various sites that gives that shows organic material remaining. So we get some hints from those, but we don't really see it in Japan. Like these animal skin was probably sewn into clothing and things like that. And you have to have a needle. We have a owl, you have a perforator, kiri ですね, stone tool perforator in Japan too, but we don't see any needle to sew this kind of material. But they have examples of bone needles in the continent, so probably they did in Japan too. Okay, it's I talk too much, so let's have a break about 10 minutes. We will start. It's 4:23, so we'll start again at the 4:33. Okay? Okay. All right. This is a general map of the human immigration of the Homo sapiens. The last group of human beings, the newest group of human beings, I should say. And we have a long, long history of evolution. And it's probably over 7 million years. It's a long time. And there were human beings became human beings in Africa. This is the theory. And after that, so much evolution took place, and so many groups went out of Africa and spread all over. But most of those races, species, went extinct. Most of them, except Homo sapiens, the last one. And those survived ones remained in Africa all the time until about 100,000 years ago. Their final journey started from Middle Africa and into the Eurasian continent. Some went down to west to Europe area, Middle East, and some went down, some went to east toward Asia. And by 50,000 years ago, some group went down to Australia. And by the time, well, close to 40,000 years, some came into Japan. The clear evidence shows that earliest data is like 38,000 years ago that human beings came into Japan. In later time, they go all the way to American continent because they could walk between Eurasian and American continent. That's a Beringer Sea ocean. It was in glacial time, so ocean level was low. Ocean level was low, and they could walk down to northern America and down to South America by by like 13,000 years ago. They reached to the south end of the South America. So that was a great journey. And so, in talking about Japan, this is what you saw already. So this is a little later than the first occupation into Japan, but the landscape at the time is just like this northern Tsugaru Straits are very narrow, and Tsushima Straits are narrow too. And probably this is northern areas colder than southern area, and probably some years they may have, in the wintertime, they may have this surface frozen, so that they could have some chances of going across the straits. And otherwise, they had to have these boats, but I don't think they had boats at the time. And there's absolutely no evidence that shows they had boats in anywhere in the world at the time. So for some reasons, they came into this island of Japan. There's no ocean between Honshu and Kyushu and Shikoku. The Setonai Sea, it was all dried up. And it was a very huge island, Honshu until Kyushu, and some islands here too. But Okinawa was separated by water, of course. You know, so. And since the strait was so narrow, and nowadays it's wide open, so there is a big current, warm current, comes down from Southeast Asia that washes the southern coast of Japan. That's なんだ、黒潮って言うんですけどね。A warm, big current that runs so fast, and that brings a lot of bonito and tunas also. And one branch current from that huge one goes up north and go into Japan Sea, go through the straits. So Japan Sea is, from our image, Japan Sea is kind of cold ocean, but it's not. Actually, the warm currents goes in, so it's a warm ocean. And that's the reason why you have a lot of snow in the Japan Sea side in the winter time, because the water evaporates in this Japan Sea, and the north wind blows, carries this humidity and hit the mountain, this pine mountain of the Japanese archipelago, and shake down the humidity, the evaporated water down in the cold climate, so it makes a lot of snow. And the wind blows straight through and over the mountain down to the south side of Japanese archipelago without any humidity. So that's the reason why in wintertime in Tokyo area, we have a very, very dry climate. You know, it's a lot of fire going on, and your lips crack, you know, in the dry climate. And the entire current system and evaporation and wind and everything makes the difference of the environment also. Anyway, it was a very, very cold ocean at the time, and the current doesn't go in. And also, as I mentioned, those a huge river, Amur River, comes from Russia and supplies a lot of pure water into this lake-like ocean. So the salt level is very, very low at the time. And that's one of the reasons I believe that this straits could have been frozen, because if you have much salt in the water, it's very hard to freeze, you know. But if it's a pure water, close to pure water, a brackish water, it's more easier to get frozen. Anyway, so that's probably how they came into Japan. And of course, the reason why they moved around was chasing animal, you know, all the way down. They had this continent and Japan all the same. They had this animal walking around, so they always have to chase. And some of the groups came down to Hokkaido, and some of them even came down to Honshu just to acquire the animal. And Oh, that's the reason why they moved up the northern area. They were in southern China too. People were in southern China too, but some of them moved up north into the colder climate. Why would they do that? They had to follow the animal anyway. And one of the reasons maybe the less germ in the colder climate for food preservation or less disease. I don't know. That's a possibility, but anyway, they had to move around anyway, or whatever the reason is. But they had to follow the animal. That's their limit. And what else? What kind of people were they? This is a modern man on the left side, and this is what they claim the Paleolithic people. The only one example, not one, but the only examples ever found in Japan, in island of Okinawa. There's a limestone fissure, very large crack, and those skeletal remains were found in the crack. And they were not very tall, but not too small either. They're rather small. And they have a very slender upper body, but very stout, very strong legs, thick bones. So obviously shows that they were wanderers, they were walking around all the time. So they had strong legs and feet. And well, we are not too sure that this was really the Paleolithic guys still, but that's what they say now. And we don't have any other skeletal remain of the Paleolithic period in Japan. Too bad. Someday. Oh, this is a reproduction of the Minatogawa man that I showed you. The slender upper body and very strong legs. Catching Yambaru Kuina, Okinawan bird. And this is demonstrated in Okinawa National Museum. Wait a minute. So their lifestyle is a lot of aspects still unknown and not very many deciphered. But this is one of the example in the States, North America, the western side of North America, I think. There is a kill site, so-called kill site. They hunted those animals, group of animal at a time, and kill them at one site. And they find a lot of stone tools and remain of bones there from the site. And this is a reconstruction of the hunting scene of the buffalo, with the spears, only spears they had. And it's really, really dangerous for human beings too. It's very risky. You have to risk your life just to catch this very strong, big animal. But once you get them, it gives you a lot of meat and material for tool making too. So it's very effective. And in some cases, there's a cliff. It's a famous cliff. And they probably in group chased the herd of animal down to the edge of the cliff and let them drop and die. So they don't have to use spears or anything. This is a kind of exceptional case. But so this was one of the style of the earlier Paleolithic hunting, the group hunting. They have to be in a group, big group, to hunt big animal. You can't just catch an elephant with just a family member. That's impossible. So in Japan too, wait a minute. in Japan too, we have found earlier stage of Paleolithic uh, sites, and most of them are in big group. It's big site. It's over like 50-meter diameter or something like that, and so many concentrations of artifacts and stone flakes and chips, where obviously they made the stone tools, produced the stone tool, and it's so big, it can't be made by a couple of families, but big group. So it's kind of natural to imagine that a big group, they formed a big group of people and hunted the large mammals. And so probably it's not related to just simple kinship, and probably different kin group, different blood group cooperated and lived together in order to get the large mammals and share the meat. And that was a lifestyle in the earlier stage in Japanese Paleolithic. And but this Japanese Paleolithic period is separated in two phases, so earlier one and the later one. And in the border is the eruption of Mount Ida that I mentioned in the earlier lecture. The huge eruption that covered the entire archipelago. And in the earlier stage, there were large games like elephants and huge deers and so forth. And they followed those animals, so they have to move long distance without planning. They had to travel for long, long distance with a large group. So it's not really intentional. It's not really a planned movement. You know, it depends on the movement of the animal. And after this drastic environmental change by Ira eruption, probably the environment and those ecosystem entirely changed. You know, the volcanic ash doesn't stay long. It's been blown by a wind, west wind, and disappear in maybe a couple of weeks or at the most a month or so. So it's not too bad. But some of the minute grains of the volcanic ash would go up farther, way up to what you call stratocaster, over the air areas. And they would stay there because there's no wind up there. And they would stay there for many years sometimes. And that would function like a screen, and then blocks the heat and light from the sun. And naturally, a lot of effect comes upon the ecosystem. Like, firstly, the plants will get it. You know, it's a lot of damage the plants get from that volcanic ash screen. And of course, those mammals who's eating plants would get the effect later or too soon. And so entirely, for human beings, the food resource gets so much damage from this eruption. And from this eruption on, the large mammals went to extinction. Mammoth and large horned deers disappeared later. And so they had to change their living system. And because they have to shift their games to smaller mammals like boar, wild boar, or normal sized deers, and even smaller ones, you know, around. And those smaller animals were not the wanderers. They may be the grass-eating mammals, but they don't move around much. They stay at certain area where they were born for their lives. So people naturally didn't have to move around, wander around too much. But of course, you can't stay in one place. If you stay there and eat up all the mammals around, then what do? You have to move, right? So the traveling, they were still traveling, but not just like the earlier stage people. They didn't go too far. And probably they chose several spots, several area. They decided several area for their camping and went around. Maybe, let's say, well, for several months or half a year, stay in one place called A, and then move to B and spend the same time there, and went to C or D, and goes around all the area and come back to the A, of course. And probably that was the new style of living, chasing smaller animals. And so they didn't go long distance travel. And also they didn't have to live in a large group. You only required this large group because they were hunting big ones. But now you are going for smaller animal. You don't have to form a big group. So naturally, the sites we are finding from the later stage are small compared to the earlier ones. Very small unit of sites. And another difference between the earlier stage is the types of the tools, stone tools. In the earlier stage, the same kind of tools were used all over. There's not much local differences. But in the later time, we see more and more different types of stone tools, even for one type, like knife, what we call them. Wait. Oh, it's a knife-shaped tool. And there are various types of knife-shaped tools. And they were all made in very similar technology, but the shape, form, and it looks is different, depends on the area. So they had more locality of tools. In the later half, this is a later half type of tools. So okay. So their lifestyle changed quite a bit from the earlier stage. The latter half, they were aiming at smaller animal in a certain designated areas, and they went around those areas. And we see more cultural locality in this latter time because they did not move around too much. So they had no communication with other groups as the earlier people did. They went all around, long distance. So many people would share information about stone material, stone tool making, technology, and stuff like that. So they could share all those material culture. So they had the same kind of tools at the time. But as they did not move too much, they would develop their own local style of tools. So we will see a lot of locality in those stone tools in the later time. Okay, and of course the Stone Age, you have to find good stones. You can't just choose the stones on the road, on the ground. And there may be some stones, regular stones, like sandstones and stuff like that, but they can't make good tools. You have to have a very specific kind of stones that breaks sharply and makes a very sharp tool. And there were obviously selected type of stones in depends on the area in Japan. This is a map of the stone area. In Hokkaido, they produce excellent obsidian, kokuyoseki, obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass. Actually, it has the same component as the window glass and glass that we use. It's just a glass, and breaks and gives you a sharp edge. It's very easy to work with, and gives a very effective cutting tool or spearing tool, like spears and all sorts of hunting tools. And in Tohoku area, northern Japan, they don't have much obsidian, but instead they would have shale, ketsugan っていうんですけどね。shale. shale ですね。ketsugan。ページっていう感じですね。本のページみたいに細かくこう割れる断面が見える。shale ですね。Also, it's very hard stone, hard kind of stone, and gives a very sharp edge when you break it. And in the Kanto and Chubu area, center mountain area, there's a big source of obsidian in Nagano. So Wada Toge, and good quality obsidian. So most of the Kanto area people would use this one. And there's one source in Kozushima. It's an island off coast from Izu Peninsula. They would have a small source of obsidian too. So this is obsidian area. In Western Japan, they wouldn't have too much obsidian except for Oki Island. This is an island, and another Himeshima Island right here in the Kyushu. And Koshidake, it's a tiny source, but they could use obsidian in this area and this area. But most of the Western Japan, they did have something called sanukite, sanuki-ishi, sanukite. There's a group of basalt or andesite. It's a volcanic stone also. It's not as sharp as obsidian, but it's a very, very hard type of stone with a fine grain. So it gives good source for making sharp stone tools too. So depends on the area, they have to choose this stone quality. Anyway, and of course they wanted for those particular kind of stone like shale and obsidian. Obsidian was so popular and they always wanted this source, but you can't find it anywhere. You have to go to the source area. So in the earlier stage, the former stage, they were long distance travelers, so there will be no problem acquiring this certain kind of stones. You have to just go there, travel up there, chasing animal, and get the nodule out of it. And but later time, you may not be able to reach the source because your activity areas shrunk smaller than the former time. So what happens would be a trade, some kind of trade with other group. There would be, wait a minute, like there will be group A goes around circular movement, isn't it? So later style. And group B would be doing the same thing, but they may share some spots in different time, or maybe they may not be sharing, but maybe they're using the very close area, to each other. So this is a very chance that two groups can meet and communicate. And very important thing in the human life is marriage. You have to make babies, and you can't do it in your kin group all the time. If they're too close in relationship, they would be a DNA trouble. So they always have to, so-called, introduce a new blood into your group. And this is also another chance, not only trading tools or tool material, but human beings too. You can exchange human beings, お嫁さんとかお婿さんとかね、やったり来たり。So they must have done this kind of communication, not very often and not very planned, intentional communication, but whenever they had a chance, they must have done a lot of communication between each other. So that's also different from the former period, because the communication would be in the earlier stage, but it's so accidental. You have no planning, and it's a long distance walk. And the less population probably in the earlier stage, so it was by chance only. But you could expect to see the other group in this form, isn't it? So it's a little bit more planning to it, probably. Okay, and so right. And the subsistence, talking about subsistence, of course, hunting animal meat is a major thing. And they don't have much resources of plants. Botanical resources are so few, and they couldn't really depend on those. But they could only eat meat and probably use blood too, because blood includes a lot of nutritious elements like salt and iron and vitamins and everything. So they couldn't lose their blood. And as I explained already, the former half of the period before Ira eruption, large games by a large group, that was the popular way of getting food. And just recently, we are finding something like this, trap pits. And normally, trap pits can be used by sedentary people, and you're settling down and you have time to dig all these trap pits and wait for game to fall in and stuff like that. You have to be really sedentary to do this kind of practice. But we are finding some of these in the earlier stage, even the earlier, former half of Paleolithic periods. And we are really surprised by that. But actually, they made this kind of hole to catch the animal too. They are not too big, They are not too big for elephants. Elephants would step in, but he wouldn't just escape right away. Maybe for deers or something like that. We don't know yet, but normally what they did was just use the spear, and with a lot of people, cooperation of people, they could catch the mammals. We don't really know how they caught the elephant. It's a lot of work. It's big. Elephants are so big and strong, and they look gentle, but normally they would be gentle. But when he was aimed at, he would get angry and would be a big disaster for human beings. So I'm sure many people died or injured from this hunting practices. And after AT, the eruption, the smaller games by a small group in smaller area. So there must be a change of methods, hunting methods. And we don't find too many of these struck pits for the latter half of Paleolithic. That's very strange. But oh, this is the latest find. This was found a couple of years ago in Kanagawa Prefecture, south from Tokyo. And you see rows of round holes right here along this is a contour, along the hilly area, hill. But there's obviously one line of rectangular holes. You see this picture? It's kind of round at the top, but as you go down, it's rectangle. It's been dug rectangle at the time before the eruption. And why? We don't know. Why they have to make this kind of straight lines? It's very difficult to dig this kind of rectangular pit instead of a round one. So it's a big mystery, and there's a lot of controversy going on still. Anyway, but we're finding those new evidences of their new hunting methods. And how about gathering? There's few plant resources and some pine cones, not pine cones, but the pine cones include the seeds. Some species may give some edible seeds. And hazelnuts. Hazelnuts is a conifer type nuts, which is edible and kind of large one, like 1 centimeter diameter, but you can't get a lot of those. And some berries, of course, some types of berries were growing in the cold climate too. Let's see. Oh, this is hazelnuts, and this is a kind of pine seed, chosengoyo, and other than that, these are not edible, just the cones, So you can't expect too much on the flora, vegetable resources. And well, some people worry about this nutritious condition because just eating meat would not be very good for you. Well, some people would say that, but look at horses and cows. They are just eating grass and build up that muscle and bone and strong bone and everything, blood and everything. So, all the body of the mammals would include whatever you need for your body. If they're living, you can live too. They would give various vitamins, minerals, and salt and whatever. And that's one of the reasons why we believe that they did not waste blood. Blood is very important for the nutritious life. Okay. And let's see, how about dwelling? They couldn't make houses. So they obviously had a collapsible tent made of animal skin and some stems, wood stems or something like that. You can maybe have an image of a teepee tent of the North American Indians. But well, that would be something like that. And there are some remnants sites that may indicate their tents. And this is a Siberian site, Marita. And stones, all the stones all around in forming circle. It's like 2 meters diameter, not very big. And a lot of debris from animal, like those horns and antlers and bones were scattered around. Maybe because this is the state that they abandoned this site and they left with all the garbage inside of this house. And another example, this is a reconstruction of the dwelling at the time. With the stems, some stems and animal skins covering and things like that. And I don't really think that they could build fire inside. It would smoke you out, even though you may have an opening at the top. It won't be. It will be warm, but it won't be very comfortable for human to be in there. It's a lot of smoke, you know. So, this is another example in Europe. It's a square type. So only at the site, only those stones, line stones in square are left. And this is a reconstruction. And there were debris of stone fragments, stone chips and flakes all around, scattered and concentrated in this area. So probably somebody was making stone tools right there by his house. And in winter time, especially in the glacier period, it's cold, so you would have a heating system, but it's not very easy to build fire inside your tent. So what you could probably do is to heat up the stones outside and bring the stone in, the hot stone into the tent while you're sleeping. Because the stones, once heated, it keeps the heats for a long time. It's one of the characteristics of the stones. And they will keep the heat. So that's one possibility of heating system in the tent. And wait. So, this is a very exceptional type of a house. It's not a tent anymore. It's built with the mammoth bones. These are jaw bones of mammoth. And these are obviously a tusk, kiba desu ne. And the thigh and legs and the head bone with an incised line with a red pigment. Red pigments signs or something like that. This is found in Siberia, but this is very exceptional. You can't bring these around. So this must be something like headquarter. This is a kind of base of it, and you would go around, but come back to this place, something like that. And this is, you don't find very much of a house site in Japan in Paleolithic time. Now, this is one very few example, one of few examples in Osaka. There was one baseball player, professional baseball player called Nashida. He's been the captain of one team, but when he was young, he tried to build his own house, and they found this. This is a line, round, aligned post holes. And the center area is kind of low. It's dug down a little bit. It's not really dug in, but it's kind of low. It's a shallow cavity inside. So this probably is one of the a tent site. at the time. We're not too sure about this because we are not finding too many artifacts inside. And this is another example in Kanagawa Prefecture. This is also a mystery to me. They insist that this is a house site, but look at the size of it. It is a post, what they claim post holes, you know, or round, in round shape. But look at the scale. It's like a 6-7 meter diameter. It's this huge house. It's bigger than Jomon period houses. And well, can you imagine a tent of the 7 meter diameter? Oh, that's impossible, I think. And there's a two fireplace with the charcoal clusters. I don't believe this, really. And there's stones, small stones, all scattered around. And they say that these were used for weight to stabilize the animal skin outside, just like these, you know, these small stones. But I don't know. I don't believe it. So there may not be too many evidences of tents, setting of tents, because they wouldn't leave anything when they collapse it and move. They left. They wouldn't leave much on the ground. So you're very lucky if you can find something that indicates the house. Anyway. Oh, this is a so-called circular units in Chiba Prefecture. This is an earlier stage. This is a former half of Edo period. This is a big group. You know, these are cluster of flakes and chips of the stone. And they were obviously making stone tools. And each cluster would indicate each person who were making stone tools right there. So, well, probably a lot of people were making stone tools at one time, or spending many days. Some less people would make stone tools right here, and other days they will move to They moved to different spots and made the stone tools. We don't really know about that, but obviously they were forming a circle, big circle, and some people would guess all the tents, collapsible tents, was laid out outside these manufacturers. So it's like a base camp, and obviously so many people were living together at the same time, at the same site for large mammal hunting. And this is one of the typical style in the earlier stage. This is also a different site, but the same formation. You can see all the units of cluster, stone tool clusters lined in circle. And this is a reproduction of the earlier stage. You know, they would form a circle and make stone tools around, or cutting meat games in a colder environment, only conifers and grasslands around. Something like that, maybe. Another things we find from the Paleolithic layers, the cluster, pebble cluster. I think I mentioned it before. And this is a very neat one. We don't find this kind of form. In most of the cases, those stones are scattered around. It doesn't form a circle like this, all scattered and all broken in pieces. But this is not really broken. You can see the round shape of each stone. And some stones are reddish. Actually, this is kind of bluish. You can see it kind of blue, but it's reflecting the blue sky, the photos reflecting the blue sky, so it looks blue. But actually, most of the stones are reddish, bear reddish hue. And some of stones bear soot, susu desu ne, soot. and charred material, おこげですね, charred material over the surface. So obviously this place was a stone heating area, and they built a fire and heated the stones, cluster of stones for cooking. How they cook is just heat the entire stones by building a big fire and quench the fire, put out the fire once. And on the hot stone, you would grill meat. 焼肉ですね。Barbecue ですね。And this kind of feature is very often found from Paleolithic sites. So it's obvious that this type of cooking device was very popular at the time. And the reason why they would use stone for meat cooking, meat grilling, is, well, can you imagine? I mean, you can grill meat over fire. You build a fire and you put the meat over it, and you can heat it, grill it. But the fire itself is very, very hot and gives charred surface very easily over the meat. And while the inside of the meat is raw, outside is all black. It's not edible. It's not very good because they wouldn't eat raw meat in that time. Raw meat is very, very dangerous. It has a lot of germs and pesticides, and it could risk your life just by eating raw meat of the wild animal. So they learned to grill the meat, cook the meat in the earlier time. But the direct fire would not give you a good result, the all black and raw inside. So this is what they found, the stone cooking, because the stones would be heated and become hot enough to grill the meat, but it's not as hot as fire itself. So it wouldn't give too much heat over the meat and wouldn't make charcoal, while the stones, once heated, it keeps heat for a long time, as I mentioned before. And at the same time, they would radiate far infrared ray. 赤外線ですね。遠赤外線日本語で言いますが、It is a kind of heat that penetrates the material. So by cooking meat over heated stone, you wouldn't get the charcoal surface, but the heat would go through the meat and the inside will be cooked as well. So this is a very clever means of cooking meat, and they knew it by experience, I think. And normally they use it so many times, and as every time you use it, the stone would crack and breaks into pieces, and finally you wouldn't be able to use it. So that's the state we normally find in the site. They couldn't use it anymore, so they abandoned it, and it became a site. But this is a very exceptional case. This is a state that they were still using it, and they left this place for some reason. So anyway, this is a pebble cooking, pebble barbecue style of Paleolithic period. And this is stone steaming device. You dig a pit. Well, we don't find a pit in the Paleolithic sites. Hardly find pits, but this is another explanation. It's like a Polynesian umu style. It's a steaming. If you dig a pit and use the fired pebble, and steam the game, steam the meat like this, and bury it. You put the earth over it normally, but it couldn't take place in the Paleolithic period because we were finding no pit. Without pit, you wouldn't be able to steam it anyway. And for hunting and eating and sleeping, what else could they do? A lot of work they have to do. They go hunting, but they have to cut the meat, cut the skin and meat, and get all the material, meat and separate meat, bone, antler, and etc. And work on bones and antlers, work on skin and hide. You know, this is he's scraping the fat off the skin of the animal. So various kind of work they have to do while they're camping. And while they have meat supply, they would do all kinds of works like that, craft works mainly. But after that, they have to move to different spots to get more meat. And that was the major lifestyle of the Paleolithic period. All right. It's about time, I guess. So, well, I'll finish up next week talking about society. Well, we don't really know about society in detail. We could guess from very few evidences and materials. So I'll talk about that next week and into the material part of the material culture of the Paleolithic period next week. Okay, any questions so far?
No, it's okay.
Okay, all right. So please write the comment. Some people do not write comments, but in that case, I can't check the attendance. You know, I can't see you from here. So please give me comments or question or whatever. And please in the comment, please write your ID and name without fail, and so that I can check it very easily. And anything else? Let's see. Okay. That's it for today. Okay. So see you next week. All right.